Hi Sam, how you doing, man? You all right?
Yeah, all good over here. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. Just sort of recovering from CJI over the weekend.
Yeah.
But one of the first things I wanted to sort of talk to with you is if you could give people sort of an introduction about what you do and how it works in terms of the sport. I think that'll be a nice sort of like jumping off point in terms of the conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Sam Antonen. I'm a mental performance coach for BJJ athletes specifically. And I have had the opportunity to work with, all high level athletes in the sport. I've worked with Vagner Rocha, coming out of CJI, Jasmine Rocha, Kendall and Brene Souza, a lot of people who are, you know, pretty high level, but also people who are just, want to win their first Masters World Championship gold medals. I kind of work with a range of people from, beginner to professional jiu-jitsu athletes. And yeah, so the work that I do could be considered like as you would hire a personal trainer for your body and get yourself in fighting shape. I work as a kind of personal trainer for the mind is the simplest way to really think about it. So getting you, to worry less, lower your anxiety, get you to, perform the same way as you do in training on the competition mats. That's probably the biggest, challenge people have because the pressure comes on and, all the doubts and worries and everything else. So that's probably the biggest thing that I help athletes do in jiu-jitsu is how do they take that same level of performance that they can do in practice and then transfer that onto the competition mats.
Nice. Yeah, I mean that's a good way of explaining it as well, being like a personal trainer for your mind kind of thing. And can I ask then, when you talk about rather than like the elite side of the sport, when you talk about your average everyday competitor, I think even though the stakes are much lower, a lot of the times the anxiety that you deal with can be much higher just because you haven't got that sort of exposure to it. Like everyone competing at CJ on the weekend, obviously that's a massive event, amount of money on the line, massive event, but they've done that hundreds of times before on smaller stages and you can sort of build up to it. But when you look at people doing their first competition, or first few, how do you sort of advise them to deal with that competition anxiety if they haven't got that exposure to sort of fall back on?
Yeah, it's a really good question, right? And when it comes to the stakes, objectively, the stakes are higher, right? More eyeballs, yes, absolutely. More money on the line, potentially, and so on. But subjectively, when you go into these competitions, the stakes can feel maybe even higher than the guys in CGI, right? It's all about your perspective and perception of the stakes, right? So when people go in and go into the first couple of competitions, or maybe they are quite seasoned compared to, and they go to a local competition, the mind finds always some way to try and add stakes on and kind of get you out there. It's got like, hey, we don't need to do this, right? So yeah, so if you're going into your first couple of competitions, the best way to kind of lower the anxiety is to lower the stakes, right? So first of all, being very aware of what you're saying to yourself and what you're telling yourself, because a lot of this stuff is just happening in the back of your mind. Some of the very common things that come up is, um, things outside of your control are the things that really causes you anxiety. That's like the number one thing, right? Things that you cannot control, that's where anxiety feeds. That's where anxiety lives. So we want to take the things outside of your control, let go of those and bring the things that you can control in front of your mind as much as possible. So the question comes, how do we do that consistently? So first of all is awareness. Like I said, you need to be aware that, hey, actually, maybe I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself, and a lot of the time it's unwarranted. Like it's like, well, what will my teammates say or think if I shit the bed? Right? What will, happen? What will my coach say if I don't do well? And there's always kind of layers to it. It might be like, hey, what if I get submitted quickly? Might be a worry, but what's the real worry behind it is something worthwhile thinking about. It's like, well, what if? What if I lose? Okay, what then? It's like, well, actually, maybe, X person will be disappointed. And then you can start to challenge that thought and go like, well, actually, will they be disappointed? Maybe you just go and speak to them. It's like, hey, if I lose, what will you think of me? Like, it's like, just communicate. I do this with like juvenile athletes. And the biggest worry for them is, what if my parents will be disappointed? I literally had this conversation yesterday with a parent and child. I was like, well, child X, what would you want your parent to do in this situation? And then parent goes, oh, well, actually, I'm never disappointed in you. And now it's a much healthier relationship. So communication could help with that as well. But whatever way you can lower the stakes is the best way to, really. 9 times out of 10, you want to lower the stakes. And then you have the likes of, Jasmine Roaches, Owen Joneses, Vagner Roaches, who like high pressure situations, and that's where they thrive. So there are sometimes situations where you want to up the stakes, but for most people, it's all about lowering those stakes and going, hey, it's not do or die, it's not now or never, right? There's never a must-win match. You want to win, but you don't have to win. So just keeping those in mind and putting in perspective that, hey, chances are you paid for your travel to get there, you paid for your entry, and you're going to have some beers with your mates afterwards. Like, just keeping it in that zone will probably help you perform with a little bit more freedom.
That makes sense as well. And I think that's something that, like I said, aside from the like exposure aspect of it, where obviously the more you compete, the easier it is to do that, of course. But I think that's something that a lot of top competitors echo as well, is that, like you said, you don't have to win. You want to, and it's what would be best for, your career, your experience on the weekend, whatever, but it's not something that defines you, sort of thing. And when you talk about the juvenile athletes as well, I think that's especially important for them, because kids, I don't know if you have this sort of experience as well, but I find a lot of the time, like teaching kids as well, they don't have the same adult thought processes that we do. Like they can't deal with that anxiety the same way that, even if adults struggle with it, we do sort of have natural ways of dealing with it that we've developed over, years of working 9 to 5 or going to school. You sort of learn to deal with it to a certain extent. Maybe it's a new environment, but you've got general ways, whereas kids are kind of coming at it fresh. Do you find it like harder to go through that with them then, where they've got no kind of like frame of reference?
It can be challenging, and it really, if we talk about juvenile athletes, the number one mental performance coach is always the parents. Like what they do matters, to the point that when I'm with parents, it's a tricky one. We kind of need to, toe the line nicely, but I'm really grateful that there's a lot of parents who want to also work on themselves in this process to help their child. But because the child is looking at everything, it not just the words that you say, but your body language. Did you look away, or are you huffing and but like everything? So they are just, they're taking it in, and they'll process it how they want to process it, right? So that is probably the biggest challenge. Kids take mental performance coaching on board so quickly. Like that was my biggest concern when I first started with adults, and then I started going down in age ranges, and I'm like, well, how am I gonna like get this like 8-year-old to understand this? But they just get it. Like when I was 8, I swear I was still in nappies. Like, look at now, like people have access to technology, and, the conversations that I can have with these juvenile athletes. I'm like, oh, you are well beyond your years. You just understand, you just get it. And yeah, those kids are some of the most consistent ones who actually use those tools, because they just go like, okay, Coach Sam want to do me, want me to do this, I'll just do it. And they just do it consistently all the time. They just don't miss a beat. So, actually at times it can be easier to work with kids, but also it's that challenge with the parent, right? If I can get that conversation going and they're a willing participant in the process, that's where the best thing happens. And then if we can get coaches involved, that kind of conversation, a lot of my juvenile athletes, they train with Jasmine and Vagner. So I can have that conversation with, Jasmine and Vagner, go, hey, actually, be mindful with this kid with this X. And then I can speak with the parents, and then I speak with the child. So I'm in quite a unique position at times where I can influence a lot of things, but I think the parent is the number one. And then comes the coach, and then, because ultimately they just want to be happy. They want to be happy and do the sport that they enjoy. And the thing that generally gets in the way is nerves, anxiety, the expectation that they on themselves. And usually that comes inadvertently from, coaches or parents. That maybe they're so competitive that they just want their kid to do so well with all the best intentions. But then, the kid clams up and it's not as much fun anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a common thing that any jiu-jitsu coach will probably sort of like resonate with you with there, is that there are some parents out there that do sort of hyper focus on the success that their kid has rather than just are they enjoying the sport itself, And a lot of the sort of like cliched things, like the parents shouting from the sidelines or complaining to the referee and stuff like that. Have you ever actually had to deal with that yourself as well? Obviously, not naming any names.
What, being in that situation? That
No, sorry, I mean like the parents that you coach. Have you ever had to sort of like bring someone back from that kind of mindset where they are like, arguing with referees, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I had a specific situation when I was at I won't name the tournament or anything, but it was a big tournament, but where I had to just remove the child from the situation. Like, I didn't tell the parent, go, hey, stop doing this, but I just removed them, distracted the child in that moment, just go, hey, have a look at this, let's do some breath work, and just remove it because maybe there was too much talk about the next opponent. Things that just isn't in the kid's control that can just cause the anxiety, right? We spoke about that earlier. Anxiety thrives in things that you can't control. So anytime I hear things like this, and again, the parents come with the best intentions, they're emotional, right? They're just, this is their child, right? And they sometimes, parents live through their kid as well. Those parents from, football and stuff that they just, hammer them to the ground. So, but yeah, I've had situations where I had to kind of remove the kid, not necessarily have a conversation with the parent, maybe after, but not in that moment when it's quite emotional, heated in that moment. So I just, remove the kid and just go, hey, let's go, let's go over here. And, just distract them in between fights. And, I just shower with everything that they did well that was in their control. And that's probably the biggest tip I can give, as a mental performance coach for parents and for coaches, is that if you praise a child, praise only on the things that they can control. So if they go, hey, you're so talented, it's like, well, you can't control talent, right? Hey, oh, congrats on the gold medal. So, then now all the good, positive reinforcement always goes to the things that they can't control. And the more they focus on that, the more anxious they get. And that's when they clam up. Whereas you can focus on, hey, you fought so hard, great effort. You just, great body language, whatever it might be that they can control. Like, hey, well done bouncing back, showing resilience, showing discipline, stepping on the mat. You're so, brave for doing that. Those are the things that is worthwhile focusing on as a coach, because ultimately the winning and the losing is outside of your control, right? You can just go in there and do your best on the day. And especially for kids, it's about, keeping them motivated, keeping them happy, keeping them, focused on things that they can control. But same thing goes for you as an adult athlete. If you want to praise yourself heavily and focus on heavily that what you could control, because it's controlled chaos.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, and you can't control how, if somebody's a sandbagger in your division, it's like, well, if you're just coming into your first couple of competitions and, this person about to promote to blue, unless you're a freak athlete, you're gonna, it's an uphill battle. But, if you go in there and just go, hey, let me just focus on things I can control, you can still be happy with your performance. Maybe you're not happy with the outcome, but you can be happy with your performance at least.
So do you think that holds true at every level of the sport then, like separating the result from the performance itself? Do you think that applies to even the best competitors in the world kind of thing?
I think so. Yeah, it's if you can focusing on the result just has very little benefit. Like before the match, it's like you can't control the result. The other person gets a say as well. So yeah, I would say at all levels, if you can detach yourself from the result, and afterwards, it's just great for your mental health, right? Learn from it. It's okay to be upset, but if you're dragging that with you days on end from competition to competition, or maybe, a result from a week ago, and then a month down the line, you go and compete again, you're now thinking, oh my God, what if I lose again? Is that, well, okay, now you're bringing what happened then to here. So again, if you can, I call it process over outcome mentality. 90, 95%, we should be focusing on the process, what you can control, what helps you get better. You get better. And then it's okay to set those outcome goals. Go, hey, I want to win this competition. That's my goal. But then you should be thinking about, okay, what can I control that gives me the best opportunity to get that result?
So it's interesting you say that actually, because that's something that I've always sort of, I coach obviously not full time. I do other work outside of it, but whenever we have competitors who are looking at their first tournament, I always say the same thing to them. Where I always sort of think about it as focusing on what you do on the mat in that first few seconds, because that's kind of when you have ultimate freedom. In the sense that if you're a heavyweight competitor and maybe you're not a very good guard player, you get taken down. Okay, they've got you where they want you to be, and maybe things aren't going to go so well for you here. If you're a person who's 6 months, a year into training, you can't prepare for every eventuality. The main thing is to just go out there. And like I said, I always think about it as slap, bump hands, the referee says go. And then if you want to shoot a double leg, that's what you need to do. And if you get that, if you get that, you finish on top position, happy days. You've won that match effectively. Like most of the time, you'll win the match anyway because you've scored the first points. But even if you don't, that's like, okay, I've done the first thing. Now I know that whatever went wrong after that, that's what I can fix next time around.
Yeah, absolutely. I was coaching a Masters 5 black belt going into his second black belt Master Worlds. And we implement this 30-second rule for him. So the first 30 seconds, you have to just compete as hard as you can. Pretend that it's a 30-second match. And then after that, you'll go into your rhythm, right? And this particular person is kind of a slow starter, very much like invites depression encounters. But like you said, I think I saw a stat that 89% of IBJJF matches are won by the person who scores first. And I would imagine that just goes even higher the heavier that you go, or the more, the level goes up. But even that alone is like, well, you said it there, is that it's kind of won or lost most of the time in that first, exchanges. So you need to be ready to go. And, this is where, lowering the stakes can be really handy, because now you're less focused on worrying about things and more focused on, hey, can I just pull the trigger here? Rather than freeze up, just pull the trigger, go out there, go as hard as you can for the 30 seconds, and then just survive the rest, right? Especially when you go in your first couple of competitions, but even a higher level. This person absolutely dominated the first couple of matches and then just had a bit of a slip up in the third. But, this works all across, all the different divisions. If you start looking at this as well, like, the person who starts strong, you start to see that, hey, those people are the people that, generally comes up on top.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's always hard to overcome a points deficit or anything like that. And I think as well, one thing that doesn't get looked at a lot, which should be quite relevant for you, is obviously the mental aspect of being, 2-0 down on points in a bad position. It's not a comfortable place to be, you know what I mean? Even if you've got most of the match left, if it's a 10-minute match and you've got 9 minutes left, if you're already down on points and you're already somewhere you don't want to be, then, it might take you half the match just to pull level if you ever do. And is that something that you have any sort of like guidance for as well, like that, dealing with that mentality during the match rather than the build up to it?
Okay, so if you fall behind, right, so you get taken down. Yeah, like urgency, right? So I work with 3 things, and the 3 things that I only judge my athletes on are effort, competitiveness, and body language. That's it. The technique will be what it will be, but those are the 3 main things. And there should be urgency, right? Either you're attacking or you're defending. And there's only a few places where you can really take a rest and take a moment. We're talking about top mount, both arms on top, or maybe, arm and head, singled out. Okay, well, now you can cook. I call these the cooking positions, very, simple to think about that way. Side control top, right, with head and arm, right, you can cook there, back, and then maybe like a half guard chest to chest is a pretty good cooking position. But now you kind of, everything else it's like a balance of scales. Like within a split second, you can start to fall behind. And that can be the end of the match. Right? So in that moment, if you get taken down, this doesn't mean that you need to rush, but you need to have urgency. And not necessarily urgency thinking about scoring, because again, you can't control that, but urgency to compete. Can you just improve your position a little bit? Can you look at now is your job to, as quickly as possible, to improve your position. Sometimes when you're on bottom mount, you're, 4-0 down or, 6-0 down, it can be very, very daunting. You go like, oh my God, this is a hill to climb. But if, inch by inch, it's a cinch, yard by yard is going to be hard. So we want to shrink that moment and go, hey, can I just improve my position? It can be hard to improve my position. And just keep that in mind. Not so much the scoreboard, but I just need to keep competing. The scoreboard doesn't really matter, right? It does, right? It's going to, decide if you win or you lose. But in that moment, you should be fully focused on competing as hard as you can and giving all out effort until you get to one of those positions where you can cook, right?
Sure.
And keep the person there. So yeah, if you can just go in there and just push and compete and have urgency and not just take a moment and go, okay, well, I'm just going to chill here for a moment. It's your job now to change the momentum. He does not need to do anything anymore. He scored his points. Now it's up to you to go chase him. And, if he's a good competitor, he's got to keep that pressure on and look to score more. But sometimes people shut the shop. So you need to make things happen. So yeah, you need to compete and open up every bit of your jiu-jitsu. Don't get, narrow-minded in tunnel vision on one particular position. You need to open up everything, right? If your close guard doesn't work, well, you need to open up your guard. You need to get things happening. That's good competitiveness rather than spamming the same position. You've seen this so many times. You just go, oh, well, this person's only got one thing and he's only going to try and enter the legs. And when you didn't enter the legs the first time, now the other person knows. It's like, well, you probably need to change up a little bit at this point. So, but yeah, urgency would be my advice, and keep those 3 controllables in mind. You can control your effort, your competitiveness, and your body language. If you feel tired, don't show that you're tired. Give all out effort and compete. Don't accept anything, nothing, no grips, no nothing. You need to now urgently improve your position if you're behind. And the score.
Nice. I mean, I think that's good advice for, like you said, anyone at any level and at any time as well, really. And can I ask, how did you sort of come into the role that you are now? Like, did you start out with jiu-jitsu and then sort of learn the psychological aspect of it later, or was it the other way around?
Yeah, so way back, the reason why I wanted to become a mental performance coach was that I played football over in Finland. That's where I'm originally from, hence why the dodgy accent, little mongrel accent. But it's, but this is what I needed at the time. I just didn't know that I needed it. Like I would break mentally in competition. I played at fairly high level, and in that brink of breaking into like the first team or the academy level in Finland, I just didn't have the mental capacity to make that break. I had the skills, but I didn't have the mentality. So now then, years fast forward, I started playing football, I started doing jiu-jitsu. I worked in a leadership position in one of the biggest insurance companies in Europe, in the UK as well. And from there, I just knew that I didn't want to work in that place, and I want to work with athletes. I want to work, do something with athletes. So then I did a certification and worked with one of the best mental performance coaches in the world. And start building from there. And jiu-jitsu was my main, sport at that point. I was competing on a regular basis. So it just became natural that, hey, I'm invested in here. I watch jiu-jitsu, I'm up to date with the events, all of that stuff. So yeah, it just naturally fell into that hey, every person I spoke to was mainly jiu-jitsu athlete. I still work with, business owners. I work with, football players, across the board, different sports. Mental performance is pretty similar in all sports, but my main focus is jiu-jitsu. My main passion is jiu-jitsu. So that's kind of how I fell into it. I don't think anyone ever decides, hey, I want to be a mental performance coach in jiu-jitsu, but it just kind of happens to fall in there. And, I love the sport. And one of the big things for me is I just want to make the sport more professional. in a way. And, there's a lot from a mindset point of view that we can bring in to help people be more consistent, more disciplined, outside of competition, but then also to compete with more freedom, and then if you have a couple of guys who compete with more freedom, you get those Andrew Tackett versus Cade Ruotolo matches where they're just not fearful at all. They just go in there and they just send it. So there's a couple of guys that, that's the product that you can have if you've got a couple of guys that are just good mentally and willing to kind of compete with freedom.
That's a nice way of phrasing it as well. And you mentioned that the sports psychology aspect is sort of the same across all sports, or similar. Do you think there's any sort of like key differences with jiu-jitsu then compared to sort of the more popular team sports like football or rugby or anything like that?
I think the biggest thing is that it's an individual sport and it's a combat sport. So that's probably the biggest difference between them two. So I think there's maybe elevated anxiety, and just the process looks a little bit different. You can't really rely so much on your teammates because when you step on the mats, it's you, and all eyes on you in a way. So there's no hiding in a jiu-jitsu match. If you're a CJI, you can't hide. You are 50% of that and everyone's watching you. So with football and team sports, you can kind of cruise a little bit more, I suppose, but that's what we're trying to get away from also with those athletes. But yeah, I think that's the biggest difference in that. Is just, there's nowhere to hide. You can feel that when you step on the mats. It's like, even if there's many mats going, you just feels like all eyes are on you in that moment. So it's probably the biggest difference. High levels of anxiety for sure. Way more what ifs and worries. So yeah, that's probably the biggest difference.
It's funny you mentioned the idea of having a lot of different mats as well, because we have quite a few like lower level, like amateur MMA fighters, and like I said, a pretty big jiu-jitsu competition team and stuff. But I find like from watching the MMA fighters like go through it, because they obviously do jiu-jitsu competitions on the side to get more exposure, that sort of thing. You tend to find that the thing that causes most anxiety for them is almost like the raw number of people, even though the stakes are much lower. Like they'll be doing MMA fights in front of 100 people, and it's just them and one other person in a cage, 100 people right around it, all watching them, and they won't have too much anxiety. But when you put them into a really low level jiu-jitsu competition where they're competing at white belt, there's eight mats going on, there's matches everywhere, that should feel less pressure, you would assume. But because of the fact that the crowd is so much bigger, even though they're not watching that particular match, you know what I mean? When you look around and there's hundreds of people, even at a local competition, even though only 20 of them are actually watching you, and they're probably all your friends anyway,
Yeah.
but just because of the sheer sort of like volume and size of the arena they're in, like a massive sports hall instead of that small cage with like a turned down light in and you can't see anyone kind of thing. A lot of the time, like that lower level MMA fighter, they tend to find more anxiety competing in jiu-jitsu tournaments than they do in, like I said, like low level MMA fights, even though you would think it would be the other way around. But from my experience, it isn't a lot of the times.
Yeah, it's also, if we think about the whole experience put together, is I think absolutely you have more anxiety getting punched in the face, 100%. But if we think about, like I said, that, the crowd and everything else, it's like, well, when you're in a jiu-jitsu competition, you're in that environment for a while, right? And you're watching a lot of matches, maybe before you as well, and all of that stuff. So there's other elements that come into play. That the point I'm making is that the MMA experience can be so much sheltered. That is, I hate you. Just go into your locker room. You're in your locker room. You're maybe got your headphones, or you're just kind of removed from the energy of the tournament, of the competition. Yeah, you might have a shared locker room, so maybe you get other people's anxiety, but at least it's not like, 20, 30, 40, 50 people in one spot. So I've had that before, that, people want to remove themselves from certain people in competition because they're so anxious or worried, just, I'm kind of catching that. So that can also be a thing for MMA fighters, is that, hey, they can remove themselves and then they are mentally ready to make that walk. They follow their routine, they do their routine, whereas jiu-jitsu competition can be a bit more freestyle. Go, okay, and then that's what you should have a routine in jiu-jitsu competitions when you go. Like, you need to have a routine to get you ready for the first match, and then have a routine in between matches as well, because it's a bit of a chaos. Whereas in MMA, it's kind of almost filtered into the process. Is that, okay, you get your hands taped, you're there, you warm up a bit, and then you make the walk. And by the time you make the walk, you're kind of locked in. You're probably not looking at the crowd too much. The crowd is, you know, it's dark, right? And then you're in the cage and it feels like in a world of its own, right? So maybe some other things as well there to consider. But how do we make that happen? It's like, well, maybe you can remove yourself from the main stage, don't watch too many matches, maybe an hour before, just start your routine, get changed, start warming up, get mentally ready in the headspace that you want to be at. If it's aggressive, look to amp yourself up. If it's relaxed, calm yourself down and lower the stakes a little bit, whatever it might be. So, but yeah.
When you say sort of like get into a routine as well, obviously that's going to include like your actual warm up and making sure you're thoroughly ready, like physically. But what do you recommend in terms of, or is there anything in particular that you like doing, or for a mental sort of like routine before the match?
Yeah. So it really, for every athlete, their competition experience is unique, and it can change from competition to competition. So for somebody going to CJI or the local competition, even if the same person, there's going to be different challenges for them. Maybe a local competition, they feel a little bit lethargic and there's got a normal challenge, and it's difficult to get amped up. So, and then in CGI, maybe it's calming yourself up and not being too amped up, right? If that makes sense. So that's just your arousal level, like your readiness, your intensity level that you go into the competition. So to give, general guidance here, I would say, like we said earlier, lowering the stakes is key. So maybe reminding yourself why you're there, right? Maybe a little bit of gratitude. Go, hey, I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to be here. Breath work is great. I've got a mental imagery track where my athletes go through breath work, positive affirmations and confidence conditioning statements. Then I get them to visualize looking back, and then visualize looking forward to the next match. So that's actually in my competitors toolkit. If you want to check it out in my socials, it's the free thing that you can get from me. So there's a lot of things in there. So, but that actual track is in there. It's 8 minutes long. So that's something I would recommend using, because that kind of gets you in the zone a little bit. Watching your own highlights can be a great reminder, just to remind yourself what you're capable of doing. I've had athletes that they just tend to forget how good they are when they're walking into the venue, and then when they watch it, hour before, they just remind themselves, actually, I don't suck at jiu-jitsu. I'm actually pretty damn good. So that could be training footage, that could be, competition footage. If you don't have footage, then just watch somebody that you like watching and emulating. So if you playing bottom game, and maybe watch someone like Levi Jones Leary, it's go, okay, well, I want, that's the kind of person I want to compete like. Your brain doesn't really know the difference between if you're watching yourself or somebody else. But if you can put something together of yourself, that can be a great confidence booster as well. But it really comes down to, understand what's your target energy? Where do you want to be at? What's the intensity level you want to be at from 0 to 100? Chances are you're not going to be 0, because it's a competition. 0 to 5% would be something like archery, that where everyone needs to be quiet, or golf. Like, hey, everyone quiets down, just be relaxed, just let it go. But that's probably not going to be your ideal energy for a jiu-jitsu competition. You're naturally probably going to be 50% up. Like, even if you look at someone like Mikey, he's aggressive still. Even if he wants to probably have, Mikey Musumeci we're talking about here, if he probably wants it to be as close to a training room environment as he can. He's not very, aggressive in the traditional sense, but he is aggressive with his jiu-jitsu. So, but if you think of, what is your target energy from 50 to 100, I would probably say Cade and Ty, they're probably on the top end, 90, 95. You see that with CJI 1, right, with the Cade versus Dinesh. Like,
Yeah.
he barely even leg kicked him, tried to sweep, and now he's throwing hands. Like, that's how, like, he's teetering in almost that street fight level energy. Same with Cody Steele, probably the reason why both of these athletes went into MMA, right? They just want to have more aggression. So you need to understand where you fall in that. So let's call it maybe you're a 70%er guy. You're fairly aggressive, but not so aggressive that you come off the cliff and you're super anxious. So finding yourself in that, you're not too lethargic, you're not too hyped up. This is called the Goldilocks zone, I call it, not too much, not too little. So understand where do you do your best work? And then you just need to find ways to either increase your energy or lower your energy. That's it. And if you have that target in mind, that gives you something objective for you to target on, right? And attach yourself on. Because if you have these up and down, sometimes you're way too hype and too anxious and way too lethargic because you just don't feel like being there. Either way, you need to do something about it to get to your zone. And if you get to that zone consistently, you're going to have consistent performances. Not going to win every match, but you're going to have consistently good performances. Like, I can guarantee that.
Nice. I think as well, it's a good point to make that, fixing the mental aspect of your performance doesn't necessarily mean winning every match, just the same as fixing the technical aspect of your performance doesn't mean winning every match as well. You know what I mean? People will improve technically over time. It doesn't mean that there's ever going to be a point that they will beat everyone in the world. Obviously some do, but they're few and far between, That's pretty much everything we've got time for at the moment, though. But you mentioned your competitors toolkit, and let everyone know where they can find you, where they can find that information as well.
Perfect. So Instagram is at Sam Antonen, as it says on the screen. So you can find it there, and that will be in my description. So you can just click the only link in there. You can find me on YouTube at Sam Antonen, same handle. So you can check that out. And and I've got my own mental training platform. So if you're interested in taking your mental game to the next level, there's an on-demand only option that is very, very, affordable for jiu-jitsu athletes and a lot of other options. So, but you can find all that information inside. So if you jump on the competitors toolkit, that's free. And then, you can work with that and send me a message. So always happy to help. Thanks for having me on, Alex. I appreciate that. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
No worries at all. Well, thanks so much for your time, Sam. Take it easy, all right?
That's fine. I'll catch you later.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Catch you later. Bye-bye.